We want to welcome everybody from NBC10 Boston and New England Cable News. Making a bit of internet history, I guess. The first pandemic book launch party. This is fantastic on so many levels, not only about the conversation we're going to have and the book that's coming out today, but also the fact that you will be able to get involved. The book we're talking about today is right here, Hunting Whitey. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in terms of what they do, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss. The difference here from any other literature or media you've seen on Whitey Bulger is that they fill in all the gaps of what happened to him when he was on the run for those 16 years, what happened to him in prison, and how and maybe why he was murdered. And so it's just, if anyone who is into whatever, there's crime novels or crime literature or whatever, I read it in 2.5 days and didn't talk to my family once. And we're lucky today to have the two co-authors, Casey Sherman and Dave Wedge. These two gentlemen have been involved in what became the movie Patriots Day. They wrote a book on Pete Frates, on Tom Brady. They have done so many things in terms of integrating not only this incredible reporting, but then translating it to other mediums like television and the big screen. So we want to bring in Casey and Dave right now. And if you have comments or questions or anything you want to talk about with these two gentlemen, please do so. We're going to be on here for about a half an hour talking about the book. There'll be a link to go buy the book because today is launch day. First of all, Casey and Dave, thanks for being on here today with us.
Thanks for having us.
Now, I don't know who's the expert on what. I know it's sort of split up when it's in the book, so whoever wants to talk first. I think the most important thing before we get into it is what's it feel like in this middle of this thing we've never lived through in our lives to launch something that you've worked hundreds, even thousands of hours on? It's kind of weird, right? It's got to be a little bit.
It is weird because, we can't sign books in this environment at a launch event like this. Normally when Dave and I write a book together, we do have a major launch event that usually generates about 400 to 500 attendees. And it's exhausting because, part of it is we're signing all day or all night. And the other part of it is we don't really get to talk a lot about the work that we've done. So even though this is unusual, it's really exciting for us.
Yeah, I agree. It's a nice format, and we're excited to hear from some of your viewers and ask their questions about this book. I think obviously it goes without saying there's unprecedented times for everything, and certainly it's a weird time launching a book for the reasons Casey just said. But I think people are home; they need good content, and we're excited to get this book out there for people to read.
I mean, not only is there more time to read, there's beach reading season, a whole bunch of things. And if you guys have questions, I have this many questions for these guys. So we have a lot to talk about. I think the first thing, I want to ask, and I guess I'll start with you, Dave, I think of the things that are so different in this book. And I read Black Mass and I've read a bunch of different things. But for me, what was so different was the communication with the FBI. The fact, it seems like everybody seems to know who killed Whitey Bulger, and you communicated with that guy. You went to the apartment in California where Whitey lived all those years with Katherine and Greig. You did so much reporting on the West Virginia prison, which I had no idea was the most violent prison in America. And so of all those new things, what to you of those 4 or 5 things stood out the most in terms of new stuff?
So look, Casey and I have written 4 books together now, and anyone that knows us knows that we do our work, and we take great pride in getting it right and in the journalism. And I think out of all those things you said, I think each of them really carries their own weight, and Casey and I kind of divided and conquered this project as we do with all of them. But I think, to hear directly from Whitey Bulger himself in the letters that we've obtained that have never been seen before, where he describes his own arrest, talks about his time in prison, talks about Katherine and Greig. I think that's really compelling stuff for anyone that's interested in the Whitey story. And certainly no one's ever heard from Freddie Gius, the man that's accused of killing him. And we have several letters from Freddie Gius that are in the book. And his daughter, Taylor, actually cooperated with us extensively on the book. So all that stuff is stuff that no one's ever heard before.
Well, let's talk about Freddie Gius for a second because, he's a Springfield guy. He, with one other person, was it Paul DeCalagero? Mm-hmm. Everyone seems to think they were involved. Casey, first of all, And you put a human side of him talking to his daughter who, went to college and is out in the world and had a very different perception of her dad. But why hasn't he been charged, or like what is the deal with that whole situation?
Oh, the Federal Bureau of Prisons is like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. They really answer to no one. Freddie Gius has been in solitary confinement since the day of the murder, and he's been corresponding with Dave and I by writing us with rubber-tipped pencils because the guards won't give him a sharp object because they fear he'll try to kill himself or he will try to kill one of them. So he is in this very unusual limbo phase, and he's even questioning about what his future is going to hold. So whether or not he will be buried in the prison system or whether or not that he will be formally charged with Whitey Bulger's murder at one point still remains to be seen.
And I'd just add, Brian, that, the wheels of justice in the Federal Bureau of Prisons turn very slowly, especially when it's an inmate-on-inmate murder. And you've got two guys doing life already in Paul D. Colodero and Freddie Gius, and they're, implicated in this murder of a guy like Whitey Bulger. There's not a real rush on behalf of the U.S. Attorney's Office to charge someone in this case. But our understanding from the research we did and all the interviews we've conducted is that the investigation is alive and moving forward.
Well, it's just fascinating. And then, it brings me to, let's just go to that phase then, because you learn in the book, and I don't want to give away too much, but you learn about the book about where Whitey was health-wise and why he moved from Arizona to another place. Are the Bureau of Prisons, do you think there was some sort of strategy to get him killed, to move him to a place like this? Or was it sheer incompetence?
A strategy to get him killed in terms of, what secrets he could continuously reveal, about his relationship with the FBI. This was, malfeasance and negligence. Whitey Bulger was an ornery prisoner. Even though he was elderly at the time, he would get into arguments with the people that were, holding him captive, including the prison nurses. When Bulger was in Florida, Bulger got into an argument with a prison nurse and said, "Your day of reckoning is coming." Now, at that point, Bulger's in a wheelchair. He's on a respirator. Prisoners in the prison yard are trying to steal his sneakers because they think he's just a feeble old man, and he kind of was at that point. But somehow, within a very short period of time, Bulger's health condition is elevated, and I think the warden just wanted him to get the hell out of Coleman Prison and send him somewhere else, no matter where that was. Now, Bulger should have been sent to a medical facility, a prison medical facility, but instead he is sent to Hazleton, which is nicknamed Misery Mountain because it is the most violent federal prison in the United States.
Yeah, I felt like they should have. The Terre Haute, Indiana, was the third of the three prisons I think he could have gone to, which was a bit kind of ironic because that's sort of like the home of Larry Bird, which would have been kind of ironic, I guess. Let's take a break from some of the specifics. We have a lot of people watching, listening to this. Some of the questions won't be directly related to what we're talking about, but there's two things that I want to, because we're going to get a lot of comments. I want to get to them so I don't get them buried. Jerron Sheffer III, I wonder if that's the sharpshooter's son or if it's the sharpshooter himself. I don't know. But he wanted to know if there's any movie plans for this book already.
So yeah, we have some producing partners that we're working with right now. We're looking at possibly a feature or a limited series. It looks more like a limited series at this point. And we think that there's a great story to tell here of an elderly gangster on the run with his girlfriend and kind of how that cat and mouse game that they played with the agents that ultimately took them down.
And we also believe that, this is a story of perseverance as well. And the flip side of the Bulger on the run story is the small unit of FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and detectives that changed the script and went after Bulger and finally found him. It's a great story about perseverance. And to Dave's point, it was a cat and mouse game between Bulger and the feds for a long time.
Well, I think that's what's so compelling is how humiliated that Boston office was and how there were people really trying to do their jobs who some people wanted it to just go away and how to work through that. The people I marvel at the most in journalism and politics and and policing is the people who are told no by everybody but don't quit. I mean, that takes a certain type of personality, and you get those types in this. I want to get to Noreen in a minute, because I think she is such a fascinating character, not prominent in the book, but I think a prominent person, in telling the whole story. But I wanted to put a pin in that and just ask this one question from Art, is interestingly named Art Hostage. And the basic question is, if you're done with this, and there is some passing conversation about the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist, is that a project you guys had ever thought about taking on?
Well, it's interesting that Bulger does talk about the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist in the book, really for the first time. And those are, among the 70 letters that we were able to obtain for the book. There's always been this rumor about Whitey's possible connection to the IRA and possible connection to the Gardner case. Bulger talks about that in the book, and I'm not going to give that part of the story away. I want people to read it, but it's a unique perspective, and I think people will either decide at that point, did Whitey really have a role in the greatest art heist in world history? Now, for Dave and I, it's certainly a story that would be interested in pursuing, depending on what happens.
Yeah, it would be fascinating. I want to get back to the book for a second, because I think we all have women in our lives. And a name I hadn't really heard at all, and like I said, I've read so much, and maybe I have, but in passing, was Noreen Gleason. And I don't want to give too much away, but in some ways, all of the men dealing with the case were dealing with it in a linear fashion. And it's get Whitey, get Whitey, get Whitey. And just talk about not just Noreen and what she brought to the table in terms of the people she brought in and what she did, but also I kind of walked away believing, and I'm not just paying tribute because I'm married to a very strong woman, that they kind of needed a female in there to change the way they looked at this.
Right. And, I interviewed Noreen extensively for the book, and you're absolutely right. I think that the male FBI agents were looking for an elderly white man in a baseball cap. Now, on a busy day on Boylston Street, I can find and point out about 5 or 6 of those guys. So you can imagine the thousands of tips that were generated over a time of 16 years. Now, Bulger had been spotlighted and highlighted on America's Most Wanted more than a dozen times, and nothing ever happened. So here comes Noreen Gleason, who's got to flip the switch. And she says, we've been looking for the wrong person in this manhunt. We shouldn't be looking for him. We should be looking for her. And that was Whitey Bulger's longtime girlfriend, Katherine Greig.
Dave,
remember that, just to add to that, all these agents that came into this Boston office knew and were brought into this case had no connection to that old regime that was corrupt with John Connolly and John Morris and Puerto Rico. And they were constantly painted with that same brush of corruption, and they took that personally. And especially someone like Noreen Gleason, where she didn't know John Connolly, she had no connection to that regime or that era at all, and she really made it her mission to figure out a way to capture this guy, to clear the name of the FBI and show that they were interested in meting out justice, and that's precisely what they did.
I want to ask you, and again, you guys you have to temper me, because I read the book and I want to make sure. I mean, there's a million things in there I want to talk about, but the FBI got a little lucky, I think, too. They didn't pick the Los Angeles market because it was too expensive to advertise that commercial that was trying to target Katherine Greig. And I think they got lucky in the sense that the networks picked up on this new way to approach the case, and they brought it national, which I think got the exposure. I don't think the ad itself is what got the exposure, but the coverage of the ad.
It was the coverage of the ad. It was the innovation of the ad, because this was the first time that the FBI had produced a public service announcement on their own behalf. And another FBI agent named Rich Tehan, who was we write about extensively in the book, that was kind of his brainchild to produce an ad that cost them about $50,000, and that was
so. That wasn't Noreen's idea. That was his.
That wasn't Noreen's idea. Noreen's idea was to flip the switch and bring in, to look for Katherine, but also to bring in these ringers, these fugitive manhunters from other offices around the country. Tommy McDonald from New York, Phil Torsney from Cleveland. These guys knew how to get their man, and Noreen was the one who recruited them and said, start focusing on the woman in Whitey's life. And then Rich Tehan puts together the ad. It's so unusual and innovative that it does become news, to your point, Brian. And the BBC and CNN covered it as a news story, and ultimately it got to the person who ultimately got the $2 million reward and dimed them out.
Yeah, and one other thing, Brian, another key decision that was made by the Boston FBI office toward the end of the investigation was bringing in the U.S. Marshals. And this case had been historically marred by the fact that agencies refused to cooperate with each other. So bringing in the Marshals was a real big break in the case as well, in addition to everything Casey just said.
Again, if you're just joining us here on NECN and NBC10 Boston, we're talking about the book Hunting Whitey. My copy's right here. And we're not here necessarily. I mean, this book is launching today, but I will tell you, I read it in 2.5 days, and it really fills the gaps between the time that Whitey was on the lam, that he was captured, and the time in prison before he was killed. And, we've had questions already, and you touched on it, Casey, and I want to put it to Dave, about his going after Katherine Greig instead of Whitey, and give people a sense, Dave, from what you could glean and all the reporting you've done, that relationship between Greig and Bulger, what was it really like?
Well, we have a lot of great stuff in the book with some, as we mentioned, we have 70 letters from one of Whitey's prison friends. And in every letter, he talks extensively about his love for Katherine, and reading some of that stuff is really compelling. And we interviewed Billy Bulger and also Katherine Greig's sister, twin sister, Margaret McCusker. And they were both very emphatic that, say what you want about Whitey, but they had a true love affair. Katherine loved Whitey Bulger, and Whitey Bulger loved Katherine right to the end. And it's really a weird thing to kind of see behind that facade of the gangster and see that, how he did really care about Katherine Greig. There's also some evidence that we uncovered, though, where he was awfully mean to her and abusive. And that's something that kind of permeates Whitey's life, and something that dispels the myth of this guy as this noble gangster, this gentleman gangster. He was pretty mean to women and very violent towards women, including Katherine Greig.
Yeah, I think that dichotomy, I think you guys point out that it's that strange thing that he sort of needed to have a woman in his life, and yet he definitely had it wasn't on equal footing. Let's put it that way. And
definitely codependent. That's
codependent. I would say more so, Whitey depended on Katherine, at the end of their run together. It was Katherine that was going out, buying all the groceries. Katherine that was going out, getting all of Whitey's heart medications. Katherine really ran that relationship. So, Whitey certainly depended on her much more so than she depended on him at the end. And Katherine could have left at any time. She could have escaped. She could have gone to the FBI office or the Santa Monica police station, which was 0.8 miles from the Princess Eugenia apartment complex. But she didn't. She stuck by her man, and she continues to stick by her man today.
We have you might as well transition to the Santa Monica apartment, because there's a lot of questions. We go to Santa Monica. One question from Arlene Whitaker: did the woman from Iceland ever get her reward? Do you know that she did or didn't?
Yeah, she got her $2 million. Yes,
she did. Do they tax that?
I'm sure they do.
Okay.
In Iceland, I would say yes.
So and I don't know who wants to take it. If Dave, you want to take it first, or Casey, but just take people through, to the degree that you want to, what it felt like for you as reporters to walk into that apartment. Was it 303 at the Princess Eugenia in Santa Monica, California?
I mean, it was definitely a momentous day for Casey and I. And, they actually have taken down the sign out front, Princess Eugenia, because so many Boston people live in Santa Monica in the LA area that it's a constant tourist spot. People go by, they're taking selfies and all that stuff. But the day we went, there was no one there. It was just a regular random day. And, we had some journalistic luck on our side that day, where we ran into a maintenance man that struck up a conversation with us and decided to ask us if we wanted to see Whitey Bulger's apartment. And of course we said yes. And he brought us in and brought us right up that elevator that Whitey Bulger came down on his last day as a free man. And we went up and we went inside the apartment, and it was rather, I guess, I don't want to say chilling, but it was a bit eerie to go inside of there. It's now under construction, or the day we were there, it was being renovated. Remember, Casey and I have covered this case for 20 years off and on as journalists in Boston. I was there when they dug up the bodies at Florian Hall and Tenian Beach, and to then be sitting in the room where Whitey Bulger hid out for at least a decade, standing there waiting for his moment of truth was pretty humbling.
Well, Casey, you guys got lucky, right? I mean, people weren't very nice to you, and then this guy, he was the one guy who was nice to you.
Yeah, exactly. Again, we did a lot of gumshoeing in this case, but luck is always one thing that you need as a journalist. And this guy came down. He was about to yell at us to get off the property, and we told him why we were there. We were working on the Whitey Bulger story. Big smile comes on his face. He brings us down into the carport where Bulger was ultimately arrested. And I asked him, what the deal was with apartment 303, because Dave and I talked our way into the building, and we knocked on that door and no one answered. And he told us that it was being renovated. And then we asked, well, can we see it? Not thinking he would ever give us that kind of access and permission. Sure enough, the next minute, we're in Bulger's lair. Bulger was long gone at the time, Brian, but the ghost of Bulger was still there. And we're looking at the walls that had been previously carved out where Bulger had stashed $800,000 plus in cash and weapons, guns, knives, killing tools that he was holding on to in case somebody knocked on his door, or more importantly, tried to kick down his door to arrest him, because it would have been a bloodbath, and the FBI knew it. Scott Garriola, who's the special agent that we write about in the book that actually slapped the cuffs on Whitey Bulger and Katherine, he was worried that Bulger might try to hold her hostage or might try to take out several FBI agents if they had gone and stormed his apartment. So instead, they had to lure him out of that apartment, and that's what he did. That's what they did, and that's ultimately why no one was hurt or injured during that very dramatic arrest.
Yeah, and you have pictures of a lot of the people here, and I do want to get to Chip Janis in a few minutes, but the pictures in the book, and you tell this anecdote that I'm not going to give away about, that I didn't know, maybe it's public knowledge, about Whitey in the basement at that time of apprehension, and you were there and saw like the exact spot that he tried to avoid at that moment of apprehension. So it's just the details you give back. It seems like it could have been a passing moment, but just the fact that you were there and sort of retraced it was it was great to read. It must have been a heck of an experience to witness. I just want to remind people here who are just joining us, we have a really nice crowd here at NBC10 Boston and NECN. We're basically launching the book, Hunting Whitey, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss. We're with Casey Sherman, the classic goatee, the nice blended in salt and pepper, and Dave Wedge. I don't know if Dave's got better genes, Casey, or if he's dyeing the hair, but they're both handsome gentlemen.
That's a great mystery, Brian, right there.
There is zero chance of that, and I will ask my wife. Ask my daughter.
I think we might have to.
It's all natural.
But anyway, so they're launching their book. Their work, their previous book became the movie Patriots Day with Mark Wahlberg. They have a book on Pete Frates that's being put onto some screen. I don't know if it's a big screen or a small screen. They've written a book about Tom Brady. And so these guys have been around this case for 2 decades. And one thing that, as a young gentleman growing up in Swampscott, Massachusetts, Billy Bulger was a big deal in terms of, he sort of came across as the most powerful person in the state of Massachusetts at various points. And I never understood how you could have one of the most powerful guys politically in the state and one of the most powerful guys criminally in the state. And I don't want to give anything away, but how can you talk about that incredible paradox?
Yeah, so we actually, Billy breaks his silence for the first time in over 12 years, talking publicly to us for this book. And, he tells us pretty candidly about his feelings on his brother and why he went one way and Billy went the other. He also talks to us extensively about his brother's murder and the family's opinion that, he was put in harm's way, and they want some answers too. But To the broader issue, it's not that uncommon in families where, one person goes into law enforcement and one becomes a bad guy. And this is the ultimate example of that. And, Billy Bulger at one point was the most powerful politician in Massachusetts. And there's a lot of people out there that think that they enabled one another in their careers.
And certainly the FBI agents that we interviewed for the book are very emphatic about Billy Bulger, and they believe that they had a strong case of perjury against Billy Bulger after he testified before Congress, saying that he had very limited, if not any, contact with his fugitive brother. But they weren't allowed to bring any of those charges to bear. So, there's still some frustration amongst law enforcement officials that say, look, at Billy Bulger, because he was a lawyer, he was an officer of the court, and yet he was still harboring this fugitive. Now, you remember, guys, that when the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, when he was captured, his family gave him up, but the Bulger family wouldn't do that, and the FBI was incredibly frustrated by their lack of cooperation, for sure.
It just seems so brazen. It just and makes me feel so naive, right? If Billy Bulger says I haven't talked to him, then I as a 20-year-old or whatever, I was like, okay.
The stonewalling by the family in this case is nothing short of stunning. They were brazen with the FBI and slamming doors in their faces, and that was, like Casey said, it was extremely frustrating for the investigators because they knew that any little bit of information, any little detail would help them crack the case. And, thankfully, people like Noreen Gleason and Rich Tean and Torsney and Tommy Mack and the rest of them continued to do their job because the family certainly wasn't going to help catch Whitey.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions here from people watching, and people are excited to get the book. And Michael wants to know about his guns. You talked about how he was armed to the teeth. Casey, you could take this one.
Sure.
The question is, how did he get his guns? And was anyone held accountable for selling him those guns?
Well, he bought those guns at gun shows in Nevada, Reno. So he was able to purchase these guns from basically used gun owners. So there wasn't any trail, any paper trail, any license that Bulger had to show. Bulger had an arsenal, and we go down chapter and verse exactly how many weapons and what kind of weapons Bulger had stashed in his home. He wasn't just a gun collector. He was waiting for the gunfight at the OK Corral, which he had been preparing for, but fortunately didn't happen.
But one thing to add there, Brian, in the trial, Bulger was convicted of several weapons charges connected to weapons that were found in different places before he went on the run. So he was held accountable for a lot of those weapons. But to my knowledge, no one that provided those weapons was ever charged.
Right now, there's like 1,000 minor fascinating details to me that I want to ask about. So I'd like to sort of close with a couple different ones, and you don't have to answer them. You can say it's in the book. But my first one is, and this one isn't necessarily in the book, how much money do you think is still out there in safety deposit boxes across the world? Do you think there was a way he tipped off someone in his family to go get it? Like, I mean, he clearly made tens of millions of dollars over his lifetime. He was found with $800,000. They lived frugally. What do you think is out there in the world?
Well, it's a final mystery with regard to Whitey Bulger. And the FBI believes that he had millions of dollars stashed in safety deposit boxes all over the country. And the FBI agents that we talked to said, watch people that are close or were close to Whitey, because somebody knows where those safety deposits are. If you watch them long enough, they're going to lead you to the jackpot.
Do you think it exists?
I do think it exists. Where would all that money go? There was only, and I say only, but $822,000 stuffed in a wall inside that apartment. And Bulger was very frugal, but Bulger was also very smart. I do think that money, loot exists somewhere, and I do think that there should be an effort to retrieve it, because all of that money should go to the families of Whitey Bulger's victims.
What do you think, Dave?
I agree. I think that the money is out there, and I'm hoping that when this book starts to get out there more broadly, that it will inspire some, IRS folks, agents in the FBI, whoever, to go out and try to find that money. Because to Casey's point, the victims deserve that. These people were robbed of their family members, robbed of fathers, husbands, sons. And, if Whitey Bulger's got money stashed around the world, that money belongs to those victims.
Yeah. Laurie's got a great question here, and we have a lot of really good questions. Before I get to some of my other rapid fire ones, where's Katherine right now, and what's her status with the law?
Katherine is living with one of Billy Bulger's children in Hingham. That's the last known location for Katherine, and I think that she is on some type of parole right now. And if she's stayed out of trouble for a year, then she'll be good to go and she can kind of walk free. I know, Dave, you've had conversations with Katherine's lawyer, Kevin Reddington, about this.
Yeah, she served her time. She was released she was released early on parole. She's on supervised release, but she served her time.
Wow, so she's out and about in the world.
She's on supervised release, so
right.
I don't know when that exactly ends, but it's soon, and she's a free woman.
So one of my favorite stories, and we got a few more minutes left here, is the story about a detective who has New England roots in San Diego. And I don't want to give away the story at all. In fact, I want you to read it in the book because it's too good a story. And the whole sequence actually might even be my favorite sequence in the book. For some reason, it just grabbed me because my question to you, and people have to read it to understand it, do you believe him?
I do. It's an art imitates life passage in the book. And for that particular sheriff's deputy, it was a low light in his career, not a highlight. I had to really drag that story out of him for quite some time. And I've seen the surveillance images that accompany that story. And it is Whitey Bulger. And that's a story that had been vetted by others in the FBI that we spoke to as well. And again, this was a sheriff's deputy that still kicks himself in the butt because he couldn't call her Whitey Bulger, and it's not a great moment in his career.
You believe him, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you read the passage in the book, and truth is stranger than fiction a lot, and certainly it is in this case. And this sheriff's deputy is from Massachusetts. He knew what he was looking at. Most importantly, and again, I don't want to blow the story for people that want to read it, but they locked eyes. They looked at each other, and he made Whitey, and Whitey knew that he was made by this guy.
That was just, I mean, the whole thing, and it gets into, honestly, some of the then compartmentalized corruption in the FBI at the time, to be quite honest. It highlights a little bit of it, but it really, truly was one of the most dynamic and captivating moments in the whole book. There are other elements of the book, and you would talk about it, and there it is, Hunting Whitey, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss, and it's just really filling in the gaps that you haven't had in previous literature if you read Black Mass or watched The Departed, and I have a final question on that. But there's some moments where you're like, Katherine really liked to do this, or Whitey really didn't like that. Like, did you glean that from talking to the people around him, or was there license in there in terms of literary wise? I mean, how did you get those insights?
I can start, and Dave, you can follow up. But everything, all those insights were either documented via eyewitness accounts or based on the interviews that Dave and I had conducted ourselves. So we, or even Whitey Bulger's own letters. So we weren't taking any literary license to get inside the minds of Whitey and Catherine. That was all documented. And as storytellers, we were able to weave that into the narrative and really make it sound and read like a story, as opposed to just a documentation of Whitey's life on the run.
The other thing that struck me, and I am apolitical, I'm a journalist. I don't have any MSNBC or Fox News tilt. I really don't. I try to tell it like it is, but it struck me as fascinating that Whitey was a Trump supporter, but explain to people how in some ways a Trump policy sort of led to his death, Dave.
Yeah, it's funny. President Trump, when he took in, there was some cuts in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and some of those cuts impacted that prison very deeply down at West Virginia, Misery Mountain. It's called. It's USP Hazleton, which is where Whitey Bulger was killed. And in the days and weeks and months before Bulger arrived at that prison to meet his fate, the prison guards union down there was in a bitter fight with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, trying to get more funding because of the staff cuts. And they had a couple of inmate murders. They had a guard that was murdered, and they were literally Congress had written to the Trump administration and said, restore this funding before more people die. And after Whitey Bulger went to that prison and was killed, that fight became even a bigger national news story. And since then, the funding has been restored, and that prison is now up to staff. And it's funny that the guards down there joke about how Whitey Bulger helped them to get their staff back. So it was really a mess down there, and Bulger shined a light on it.
You know, sort of we'll close with this. You know, people read or saw Black Mass, the movie with Johnny Depp and The Departed, which I thought, outside of some overacting on Nicholson's part, I thought it was just, I mean, let's face it, the accent was bad, but I thought DiCaprio was amazing, and that movie was so powerful. Yeah. Is this going to be a movie? Because this, the way I look at it, this is the last chapter. If you look at it like a triptych of his life, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. I mean, we tried to put an exclamation point on the Bulger saga, really. And, you know, what we're doing right now, we're developing the material for Hollywood, and it can be a feature film, but I think it's going to be a limited series because, you know, those are actually more popular than the features are right now. And it allows us a little more breathing space to get into Bulger's head, to get into the, the backstories of the FBI team that captured Whitey Bulger, to really peel back the onion about what Bulger's life was like in prison. And, you know, Johnny Depp played Whitey Bulger in Black Mass, but now we're looking at actors like Bryan Cranston, Ed Harris, Woody Harrelson, for example. Those are all candidates.
Those are all awesome.
Any one of them would be great for this role.
Yeah, you know, this series is going to be, it's a great character study in, you know, between Whitey Bulger and Katherine, and also a great female lead like a Noreen Gleason. And to Casey's point, you know, with a limited series, we can have, you know, 10, 15, 20 hours to tell this story as opposed to just 1.5. And this story deserves that kind of time because it was a wild ride.
You know, not to be like, some sort of a creative assistant here, but the book really does a good job of going back and sort of summarizing and encapsulating the early life and how you got there. And then the middle part is his life on the lam, and then the end is sort of prison and how he was killed. And you could do it like with 3 separate casts, right? You could have like the early Whitey, the older Whitey, and then the dying Whitey, right? Yeah. And as somebody said, you know, everyone seems to want Mark Wahlberg to be in this one too. So maybe you could put him in phase 2 or phase 1. I don't know, but like Renee said, Mark Wahlberg better be in the movie. So you had some success with him before.
We've worked with Mark on Patriots Day. We'd be happy to work with him again. So we're excited we're excited for people to read the book, and we're super excited to take it to the next level to the series.
Yeah, listen, last words, guys. Again, Brian Shackman here with Dave Wedge on the left of your screen, and Casey on the right. At least that's on my screen. I'd like to each of you have one last word before we say goodbye in terms of this launch of Hunting Whitey. Why don't you start first, Casey?
Sure. Well, you know, again, we appreciate all the work that you've done today, Brian, and all the viewers, NBC10 and Neckin, to give us this opportunity to really discuss Hunting Whitey. We hope that everybody, you know, picks it up, because we do feel like, all the other Whitey Bulger books out there are great. They set a foundation. But ours, we believe, is it's the end of the saga, and we fill in all of the gaps that people have been scratching their heads about, for many years. And we were just very lucky and very fortunate to get the kind of access that we did to tell this story the right way.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we're upset and we feel sad that we can't have a big event to meet all the people that have supported us and want to read this book. We love doing that stuff. We look forward to doing it again. And we're going to have a live event eventually when we come out of this thing. And I hope everyone's doing well out there. We thank you guys at NBC10 and Neckin for doing this. It's certainly an innovative way to launch a book, and we really look forward to people reading it. And if people want to reach out to us with questions that they didn't get to today, they can reach us on Facebook.
Yeah, you guys made it clear that you want to interact with people as much as possible, and we'll continue to populate the comment section here. And, I know Chip was going to maybe come on, but I didn't see him come on to talk about his situation and his relationship with Whitey. But if you want to continue the conversation, both Dave and Casey will hang out and try to answer your questions, either type them up or do what you may. I do want to point out two quick things before we say goodbye. I'm in my wife's study. We don't get compensated for this. We do this because it's a great opportunity to create some content for our viewership and to give you guys an opportunity who work so hard on this, get the word out. And the second thing I wanted to say is that, we're so critical. I mean, there's so many critiques of law enforcement and so many different things about our world that are criticized. I know we have a lot of racial issues now in the last 24 hours that we've been monitoring. The FBI has been treated fairly and unfairly on this case. And I think the one thing that you really got to put to the fore here is that there are some great law enforcement officers, both men and women, who worked this case and easily could have given up. And I think that's something we didn't even touch on. But let's just close with this in terms of your sense of that this is now the legacy of negativity with this case is now behind them.
Yeah, amen. And I think that's ultimately, as they told us during our interviews, we didn't care if it was a police officer in Bogota, Colombia that captured Whitey. We just wanted him caught. But the fact that the FBI actually caught up to Whitey Bulger and put those handcuffs on him, it was, it was like winning 10 Super Bowls in one and clearing the name of the Boston office, lifting that stain that was put there, and rightfully so, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But, it's a new day, especially with law enforcement. And ultimately, this is a story about perseverance and going above and beyond in the opportunity and to catch their man. And that's what they did.
Listen, I just want to finish with Rocco Della Colli. He says he's an old Italian guy, love to play a part, do it for nothing.
It looks good.
Yeah, so you got his Facebook contact right there in the feed.
Brian, I did see that Chip Janis joined. So
he did.
Dorcas Janis, you'll see him there.
Yeah, there it is.
Janis is Chip's wife, and Chip Janis, we've been mentioning him. He was Whitey Bulger's prison art teacher.
He was his only friend. His only friend.
There he is right there, and a very talented artist. And thank you to Chip. Because Chip was able to, get us access to all of the Whitey Bulger letters. That photograph right there which is the last known photograph of Whitey Bulger alive, and that's all because of Chip's relationship and friendship with Whitey Bulger.
Yes, I didn't see. I was looking for Chip the whole time, and he was in prison with him in Arizona, and Whitey was a lover of Native American art. Listen, again, the book is Chasing Whitey. It's out today. There's a link on this to go out and get it. Of course, you can look at anywhere, Amazon, wherever you get your books, you can get it. I got my copy and I read it in 2.5 days. Dave Wedge and Casey Sherman, we so appreciate your time here on this Tuesday.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks to the audience as well.
Thanks, guys.